This is Paul Schneiderman today on the 146th edition of the Sports Untold Podcast, Sports Untold Podcast, also on Rainier Avenue Radio. My special guest today is Bill Hogan, PhD. Dr. Bill Hogan is the former athletic director at Seattle University, and he has served as a college athletic director at St. Joseph's College in Indiana, the University of San Francisco. I think I'm okay calling you Bill, right? Not Dr. Hogan.
Absolutely, please.
Okay, that will work. But we got to get your we got to get your doctorate recognized.
Oh yeah.
My podcast is also now on Spotify, YouTube, Amazon, Google, iTunes, Podbean. You go to sportsuntoldpodcast.net. I encourage my listeners to participate and click on the like button, not the hate button. Comment and go to sportsuntoldpodcast.net. You can also just Google Sports Untold YouTube, and you can see a lot of the video and audio versions of my show. Producers, Olivia Coyne, she's doing a great job. Olivia just completed her studies at University of Washington, and she's now looking at maybe going to law school, where she would join yours truly. All right, Bill, let me get back to you. Bill has a master's in education, a PhD in educational administration and supervision, with an emphasis on sports administration from Bowling Green University. Bill has taught at several universities, besides serving in college athletic administration. Bill was my guest on the 50th edition of Sports Untold, and I recommend to my listeners, if they have not already, definitely listen to that interview. There was a lot of stuff we went into in that interview. We may not go in today, so this is something of a sequel, but we'll hit on some interesting subjects relating to college sports and Bill's career, and just get his thoughts on a range of issues. The whole college sports world is sort of upside down right now in some ways, and I couldn't think of anyone better to have on to help us analyze it than Bill Hogan. Well, again, Bill, thanks for coming back on the Sports Untold podcast, also on Rainier Avenue Radio.
Thank you, Paul. What if the listeners like your show but don't like the guest? Can they?
I find the opposite problem. Usually the interviewees people are into, the interviewers where maybe there's a little issues.
You did a great job. Always prepared, Paul. So
no, I like to have fun with it. It's great to have you on. Bill's an old friend. I've known you now since 2009, and it's great to have you come back in the today. Well, Bill, I want to start with this question. Neat news in your life that in 2022, you were inducted in the National Association of Collegiate Directors of Athletics Hall of Fame. Tell us a little bit about this Hall of Fame, Bill, and who are some of the ADs that are in it that maybe some of us know or know of, and who's someone who's not in this Hall of Fame you'd like to see inducted one day?
Oh, wow. There's a lot of people that I think are deserving. I was an athletic director for 35 years, so I met a lot of people along the way, different leagues. Was in the old Division II league back in Indiana with Butler and Evansville and Valparaiso. There's a lot of great people there. Bill Steinbrecher, Bill Blood. There's just a lot of people along the way. And at USF, I was in the West Coast Conference for 15 years. There's some really outstanding athletic directors there also. And when I came to Seattle U, I spent 15 years at USF, but they were interested in bringing back Division I. And it was one of those, we'd be the first school to ever have done that. No one has ever returned to Division I after we left in 1980. I think that's probably pretty well known. We got the O'Brien twins and Elgin Baylor involved and some other folks. So it was hard, very difficult. The NCAA tries to discourage schools from going to Division I. I think it's a matter of breaking up the pie into too many pieces, as they say, with the revenue streams and that kind of thing. So, but I will say that it was a tremendous honor. I wasn't expecting it and was kind of shocked by it all. But it was they do it once a year. In fact, this year, what NACTA is going to try to do is put together a group of former athletic directors, and there's a lot of those folks out there that are concerned, as you kind of implied in your comments. There's a lot going on in the NCAA these days, and there's some major concerns, frankly.
So, does the Hall of Fame? Where is the Hall of Fame based?
Cleveland, Ohio. That's been there forever. They've had three different executive directors. They're all they just got a new one here recently, and it's a great organization. I think that they should do more, which they are now. Pat Manning is in charge, and he's the first one to really reach out to the former ADs. I think there's a lot of. I use it this way, Paul. Back in the old days, the really good coaches who took care of their kids and loved their student athletes, they would usually move up to become an athletic director. And then that person then would transition into the commissioner of the leagues. And I think what we're missing these days is that kind of a person who worked his or her way up and just made a big impact on sports and on the student athletes. And I've never run an AD in my life who didn't care about his kids and want those student athletes to graduate and be highly successful people. But nowadays, they're from other parts of the world. If you look at the last two Pac-12 commissioners, they were from outside of the chain. So what people don't realize, and I think Mark Emmert, who was obviously an outstanding president at the University of Washington, what he said a number of times was that there's really no formal authority in the NCAA structure. It's an institution. It's made up of it's organization made up of its members. And what had happened is that your authority or your power comes from relationships. And you serve for 25, 30 years in a coaching role, an athletic director role. That's how you build those relationships, and that's how you build your authority. Well, if you're from the outside, unfortunately, I don't think you have much of a chance to build the power structure that you may need to impact the changes that are necessary. So it's I think the biggest thing is just getting back to what it was before, where you had a lot of people that were part of the organizations for decades and contributed in a wide variety of methods and manners, and we just don't see that as much these days.
So are a lot of the Hall of Fame members in this National Association of Collegiate Directors of Athletics Hall of Fame, are a lot of them former coaches? Like, is Bear Bryant in there? Wasn't he the athletic director at Alabama?
I don't think he was the athletic director,
okay.
but there's you've got the names of all the people that the Vince Dooley types. Vince was a wonderful person, by the way, but people like himself, Kevin White, who's he and I and his wife all went to St. Joe College together.
Okay.
He and he was the athletic director at Maine, Tulane, Arizona State, Notre Dame, and then Duke. He just retired, but just probably one of the best we've ever had in that position. But folks like that are in the Hall of Fame. In fact, he and I both went at the same time, which was interesting because we had known each other since the early 70s, and we stayed in touch all those years. And I'm thrilled with his success, but also he keeps talking about. In fact, he's worth looking up. He's written some pretty impressive reviews of the state of the NCAA, and I know he's writing a book. I hope it gets published here pretty soon. But he's got a lot of great information on what he calls the academy and how we've kind of gotten away from the academy. And you hear conversation about the football breaking off from the university system, all those things. So, but I found him to be particularly interesting and highly effective as an athletic director.
I don't know if you mention any specific names, but just feel free to throw out one for fun of someone who's not in that Hall of Fame you'd like to see. And I'm sure there's 100 you can mention. Can you just mention one name of someone you'd like to see get inducted?
Yeah, there's a guy named Gene Dors who was a phenomenal athletic director for a number of years, mostly at Jesuit schools. Ken Kavanaugh, who's remember in Florida Gulf Coast had Dunk City?
A little bit.
Yeah, so he and I were at Bowling Green at one stage of our careers, but he was the athletic director at Bradley University, then went to Florida Gulf Coast to take it from Division II to Division I, and they had that run. That was probably 6 years ago.
Right. Oh yeah.
He's phenomenal. Interesting when we tried to get this one AAA organization, Athletic Director Association, started again, and there have been two failed attempts. Basically, you have 1A. There's two levels of 1A. There's the big five with the Pac-12, the Big Ten, ACC, SEC, that kind of thing. And then there's a lower division uh, that's not quite the big time football. Like I would say a Montana, Idaho, uh, Eastern Washington, those types of schools. And then there's a third level. They're basically non-football playing Division I school, Gonzaga, Seattle U, the University of San Francisco. And so when I was at USF, we were getting together to try to get this group started again. Ken was the main guy behind the whole thing. And so I missed the meeting, and they made me president.
Oh,
So
that's funny.
you know how that goes. So, but I did that for a year, and then I was the first one, and now it's a thriving organization. We work very hard at it, but Ken was the main person behind that effort. And
Can people visit this Hall of Fame? Is like a Hall of Fame room people can go into and see?
back in Cleveland, Ohio.
Okay.
I've not been to it, but it's you get really nice awards and that kind of thing.
All right. I've been to the Football Hall of Fame in Canton. I've been to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in Cleveland. Maybe I'll check out.
Yeah, they should put me in the Hall of Fame or the Music Hall of Fame in Cleveland. I've been there too. It's great. It's a great thing.
Great place. Great place. Yeah.
Let's talk about something else. I don't like talking about myself that much. So,
Oh, well, I can't help. We'll talk about yourself a bit.
okay.
We talked about athletic directors a little bit, and who's a living person in college athletic administration you'd love to just get really deep with and chat with, and who's a deceased person in college administration you would have loved to have spent time with?
Frank Borals, the former great football coach at Arkansas. He's passed away, but he's one of those legendary figures. I got to meet him once, and I found to be kind of one of those. It's sort of like a Paul Bear Bryant kind of figure where he knew all about his career as an athletic director. Of course, Vince Dooley, as I mentioned earlier, he was fantastic. And what was the other question?
Yeah, who's someone who's still with us, someone who survives today? You just love to pick his or her brain on college athletics. You already know the person.
Director. I would say probably the new person at the University of Washington. He seems to be. I've met him once. He's had an interesting career, mostly because he moved up through the ranks of an official. He wasn't like an athletic administrator, like an assistant AD. He came up through the ranks through the guy who was the AD at Stanford, became the head of the Big 12 there in those important years. But that's how Troy Dannen's his name, and I met him. He seemed like a really good guy, but different perspective. Never thought about, I yell at officials more than I talk to them. So I thought it'd be kind of intriguing to spend some time with him. He seemed like a pretty good person, and sure do a good job there for the Huskies.
You mentioned Troy Dannen, the current Washington athletic director, my alma mater, and I live in Seattle. Do you have any thoughts on what Troy should do in figuring out who the new University of Washington men's basketball coach should be? What kind of unsolicited feedback would you give him, Bill?
I think the biggest thing, it looks like he tends to hire head coaches who've been through it all before. I do think probably in my career, that's been one of the things I did most of the time, almost all the time. And we had a lot of success. Someone who's already been through it. I think there's a tendency when you get an assistant coach moving up. Now, some have done very well, obviously, and there's good stories about that, and even in across the country this year. I mean, Mark Few at Gonzaga was one of those. There's been the last two assistant coaches moved up at University of San Francisco, had never been head coach. So, but that's kind of just a particular thing that I kind of I had always looked forward to, and he seems to be that type of a person where he's hired the former head coach at the University of Arizona, and I would not be surprised if he hires a current head coach at another school at the University of Washington. I like to see them do well in every game except one a year. We lost in double overtime. I think Seattle University did. So other than that, I root for the Huskies for the most part.
Bill, let me throw out a thought to you, and feel free to challenge me on this thought.
Okay.
So the last 6 Husky men's basketball coaches were essentially let go, beginning with Marv Harshman in the 80s. So from Harshman through Hopkins, whether it was just or unjust, these 6 coaches did not end very well. Should Washington just do something more completely out of the box this time? I mean, I heard the name Nate McMillan come up. Should they just do something very unique and just because I mean, when they've gone for these coaches for other universities and prominent assistants, it just hasn't gone so well. I'm just throwing out that thought to you. Should they do something just completely out of the box this time?
Fascinating question. I think, the one thing I did review and research a lot, especially I was at USF where they had that. USF was the Gonzaga of the 60s, 70s, and 80s. So, and then highly successful top 5 teams. The one thing that came up pretty regularly was going to the NBA, and actually researched this pretty thoroughly. Anybody who's elevated from the pro ranks to a college coaching position, if they had no previous college experience, it did not go well.
Interesting.
The conversation went something like this: I can learn the rules. Okay, you learn the rules by doing the rules. You don't learn the rules necessarily by just reading a book. And the guy at Arkansas now, in fact, when I got the conversation about him at one point, I just suggested that he go to the college ranks first, which he did. Now he's done very well. He did well at Nevada, and he's done well at Arkansas. But out of the box. So I didn't realize there were 6 that all ended that way, Paul. So that's news to me. I really like Lorenzo a lot. He was a great guy, and but eventually maybe it kind of runs out. But outside the box, I don't. That would be. There's probably some folks out there that could be that way. Could be that good list, but they're this current team was they had won 17 games and they were ranked number 66 in the net, what they call the net ranking, which is normally good enough for an NIT bid. And but I don't know about when you go through the transfer portal and the NIL stuff, it probably is going to have to be somebody that has done that kind of a job before. If there's one thing, just I always like to pick out people in my career that what needs to be done at this particular job, and you find someone who's already done that, probably a little lower level or at the same level. So, but outside the box, boy, I don't know. Maybe who do you think they should hire?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I'm not saying he'd ever come to Washington. Why not hire kind of a renegade type? Hire Rick Pitino. I don't know. Just do something. Just mix it up. I don't know. I'm not saying we should or shouldn't do that. I'm just kind of thinking that we've hired all these mainstream coaches, all good men. I'm not saying they're bad guys or anything. It just hasn't gone that well.
Yeah, Rick Pitino, I always thought I got to know him because he had recruited my nephew at Kentucky, so I got to know him. And then when they won the NCAA championship, they practiced. The region was in San Jose, so he was in my our gym quite a bit. I got to know him fairly well, and I liked him a lot. Sometimes there's you kind of make a mistake, or you allege to have made a mistake, and depending on who the individual was. But I've thought of things like that, because sometimes the coach already has a pretty good settlement financially from his previous institution or her previous institution. Sometimes they come in and they don't cost as much. And I found him to be a fascinating guy. There's other folks out there. The guy at McNeese State, he was at LSU. They were 27-3 or some crazy number this year. He'd be interesting, But there's, I was told this by probably one of the greatest athletic directors of all time. He's told me one time when I was looking for a coach, he says, "Hey, Bill, there's no such thing as a coach without any baggage."
Right.
So, how much baggage do you want to take on? And I became really good friends with Bob Huggins. I haven't seen him for a while. The former coach at Cincinnati, West Virginia, but he's been mentioned for the Louisville. Yeah. Now, Bob Huggins is a phenomenal coach, and I've gotten to witness his practice. I used to go to his practice all the time. Was at Cincinnati because I'm from the area. So
right.
He and I and his former assistant were really good friends. In fact, his former assistant, who's passed away unfortunately, but I helped him get hired at St. Joe when I went to San Francisco. I was a head basketball coach there too, I was a decent coach until the 3-point shot and the shot clock. I
That
just,
changed.
yeah, I don't know. It was just, I never liked it. Never, it just confused me as
I
a kid.
forgot to mention in the introduction that you were a college basketball coach as well. Yeah, I'm not specifically saying the Huskies should hire Rick Pitino or you throw out the name Bob Huggins. I'm just wondering if maybe it's just time to mix it up at the UW men's basketball program. I don't
That'd be
know.
fascinating. And the one thing I think you have to think about is the NIL and the transfer portal. And I think you may need for lack of a better term, a big name to kind of come in
Right.
and kind of. I find it interesting that the UW football is really focused on the NFL experience. I think that's intriguing. I thought, wow, that's a different way to look at things. But they
Right.
had
Right.
36 years of NFL experience on their staff now, and those are the kind of things that you may have something there where you just kind of
Mix it up. Right.
for lack of maybe not so much outside the box, but maybe a non-traditional person.
Let's see. Let's see what happens.
Yep.
He's got a tough. The UWAD has tough decision make. All right, Bill. I've asked these two questions by every guest since 2019. I don't think I asked you these two questions last time you were on, so I'm gonna ask them today. You've worked in sports for a living. Who is a living person, a living sports figure? It can be a player, general manager, owner, someone who's still with us in the sports world. You'd love to chat with, interview, and who's a deceased person, sports history you would love to spend some time with and maybe interview or chat with.
Um, well, Bill Russell he's passed away, and he lived here in Mercer Island, and he was a USF guy. And so in my 15 years there, I saw him probably at least once every year, well, a couple times every year. Um, I think he's written about 3 or 4 books. I've read all of them. I think he'd be a guy just to kind of get a really good handle on as far as just his perspective on looking back on his career. He did this one big thing. We had a red tie dinner here at Seattle U and raised a lot of money for it. And one year, Elgin Baylor was supposed to be our honoree, and he had a health issue to come up. He wasn't allowed to fly. So this is on a Tuesday, and the event's on Saturday. Okay, it's one of those panic modes. And I remember Dino Rossi, a great politician here in the state of Washington. He was a chair of that particular year, and we're sitting in a car thinking, what are we going to do? I mean, we don't have it. We've sold out because Elgin was coming back. It sold out. And then so somehow along the way, Elgin and Bill were really tight. And so Bill agreed to come. And he has his moments, when he can be rather difficult, as been recorded. He didn't sign autographs and things like that. And I was just hoping that he would show. It was very nerve-wracking at the time, but he came in and gave one of the greatest 15-minute speeches that I've ever heard, ever. And that to me was really fascinating. So, but I'd like to spend some time with him and kind of get a better handle on on what some of his feelings were about things in general.
Russell's name has come up on the show. I've asked that
Yeah,
question.
he's intriguing. He's carried it out. Elgin and what people probably don't realize, Elgin and Bill were 1 year apart in their college careers. And when you read an Elgin book, it's very similar to the experiences of a Bill Russell. When you go back to the 50s and the 60s, late 50s and 60s and 70s, the experience of the African American athlete was very different, I think, than it is today. And I would kind of like to get that perspective on it. Elgin was a class act. He was just very humble person for being. What people don't realize, for 6 years he was like LeBron James. He was that kind of athlete. He was 6'5", 6'6". Although they say LeBron's more like 6'7", but that kind of an athletic guy. But he tore his kneecap. And back in those days, if you tear off your kneecap, you're probably not coming back. So he had that, and then he had a Achilles tear. So he had a bunch of injuries, but still was all NBA all those years. So, but as far as somebody that's kind of fun to talk to is the guy you had on your show here recently, Johnny O'Brien.
Oh, he was great.
Johnny O'Brien, he's a legend. 5'9", played center.
I know.
played center at Seattle, and he was the first person to score 1,000 points in one season in the history of basketball. That's
Amazing.
back in the early 50s. But he was a 5'9" and he played post. And that's before the 3-point shot. So you know that those shots came. But he's always a lot of fun to talk to. And he's going to be 94 here coming up pretty soon. So I hope he stays with us forever.
Those are great names. You know, Bill, it's just so neat that you, two famous deceased American, very famous American athletes you knew personally, Bill Russell and Elgin Baylor. It's pretty fascinating that you knew those guys, and no, it's just neat.
I've always enjoyed spending time with. I always try to learn something new every day. You know, I've got 4 rules now that I'm in my twilight of my career. Is one, no meetings before 10 a.m. So thanks for having us at 10 o'clock. Uh, uh, Meet new people. You know, do something that matters, and no boss, no bosses.
Uh, all right. Another question. I don't think I asked you last time. What's your favorite sports movie? What's your favorite sports book?
Well, Brian's Song was my favorite sports movie as far as a serious movie. Um, I did like Caddyshack and what's that hockey one with Paul Newman, Slapshot?
Oh,
Yeah.
Slapshot. Yeah, that was
But as
good.
far as a serious movie, that because Brian's Song, that was my college campus.
Right.
The Chicago Bears practiced there for like 30 or 40 years. In fact, I lived in George Halas Hall when I was at St. Joe. So that was probably one of my favorite ones. And that was a real tearjerker back in the day. And
For sure.
that was um, yeah, I would say that was probably my one of my favorites. Uh, as far as sports movies in general, anything that's kind of inspiring. Hoosiers.
Great movie.
I lived that life for many years. I went to school there, and I worked at the college for about 10 years. So those were kind of the inspiring movies at the time, and just you can always watch them again. You know, no matter how many times you've seen, you could always watch them again and still be
No
excited.
doubt. No doubt. Can you mention a sports book you enjoyed?
Um, Anything that Michener wrote, James Michener. I find that sports books I enjoy. When I was a college professor, I taught a lot of MBA classes and sport management classes. We always had our students read a head coach's book. So I found that to be. But James Michener was the kind of guy that really got in deep on the whole concept behind sports and how it evolved, and he could predict the future. And I think one was Sports in America. I think was one of it goes way back.
I have one of his books back here somewhere. Yeah,
There you
so.
go. And there's this guy named Tutko who was a sports psychologist back in the 70s. And when I was in graduate school, he wrote a lot of books about the psychologists. Well, now they have all kinds of things you analyze as far as personality traits and things like that that he kind of started those. So I'm probably inclined to go to those books, although the biographies are always pretty good. And
Yeah.
I became a big fan of Mike Dick. I was back in the Chicago area during the '85 Super Bowl Shuffle, so we had a fundraiser back there, and we had Mike Dick become our guest speaker. So I spent a lot of time with him and his wife, and it was fun to kind of get. He did it for nothing, which was we raised a lot of money, but he did it for nothing. But he what was that famous line he had? He said, "I'm about as subtle as a punch in the mouth." That's a pretty good line.
Yeah, those were fun teams. Those mid '80s Bears football teams. Bill, so we're in kind of an interesting era in college sports. What general tips do you give to someone, maybe like Olivia, my producer, who may be interested in going into college athletic administration one day? What tips do you give to someone in this era who's interested in going into college athletic administration?
I think two things. One, you kind of as your student pick the marketing side or the management side of an athletic department or an athletic organization, and there's two kind of totally different people. Um, the management side has to be really accurate. For example, a compliance person, whereas the marketing person could have more out of the box, as you mentioned earlier. I would say that kind of pick one side or the other. The days like myself of working your way up through the system, I don't think that happens anymore. You don't see people that go from Division III to Division II to Division I. If you're interested in intercollegiate athletics, so I suggest you probably pick one of those two, marketing side or the management side, as a student to learn, develop your expertise. But then, if you want to be a Pac-12 type athletic director, then start there. Go as an intern, go as a volunteer. I used to tell my friends who looked at my career and said, "Well, I'd like to be doing something like that." I said, "You have to choose 4 years of poverty, literally, to really kind of work your way up. It's about 4 years of poverty, and financially, and you're doing everything you can imagine to work your way up, volunteering for all the shifts and the game operations and just being around a lot. So I think that there's a certain energy there. So that'd be my suggestion. I do think, though, that the days of kind of work your way up, like even Kevin White, he started at Loras College, started at Loras and then at Notre Dame and Duke. That's a pretty good run.
No doubt, no doubt. Bill, when I had you on about 4.5 years ago, I asked you a question: if an athletic director could be a good AD and not be much of a fundraiser. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I think you said it's possible. It can be tough, but it's possible that an athletic director can maybe delegate fundraising to someone else, but it can be tough in this era. Okay, here's another question I have for you, Bill. Two questions. Have you seen people in college athletic administration who are not big sports fans, but they're good with the administrative stuff succeed? And if you've seen people in college athletic administration who love sports, but they really don't like the paperwork and minutia that much, have problems? So I guess I have two questions. A non-sports fan working in college athletics and a sports fan working in college athletics who doesn't love the paperwork stuff. Analyze those two.
Well, I always found that in almost any organization, the person at the top has to look in the mirror and admit his or her weaknesses. And then what I've always tried to do is the person sitting closest to me in the organizational structure is my exact opposite. So I think I hope that kind of answers your question, because I've seen people who, I think the worst thing you can do is as an administrator is hire people that think like you, hire people that agree with you all the time. And I've had this theory for 35 years. I can almost always tell, excuse me, if a coach is going to be successful head coach by his or her first hire as the first assistant coach they hire. If they hire someone like themselves, they almost always fail. If they hire someone, they say, "Wow, that's an interesting hire," and it was like somebody's totally different. Like, in other words, they looked in the mirror and they knew their strengths and weaknesses, because there's all kinds of ways to be successful. You see people who are they win a lot, their teams do well. There's a guy at Pepperdine years ago, Wayne Wright, who's had a phenomenal run at Pepperdine, national championships in golf and baseball, and the basketball teams were great. And he was about as common a regular guy as you can possibly. He just never. I remember his president described him as someone that he was like a ham sandwich, where it tasted good, but you don't know why. He's one of those kind of guys, kind of nonchalant, easygoing, and a great guy, but just pretty much like that. And then I've seen others that are they live and die with every missed free throw. So, and the intensity, the pressure. You mentioned the thing about the money earlier, that the money is part of the system. Even if you're not. Some of the big schools, Ohio State, they have these outrageously large budgets, but they generate almost all the revenue themselves. You have those kind of operations. Then you have a lot of schools like Seattle University or the University of San Francisco or the University of San Diego, who are they depend a lot on the budget from the university because you just can't generate that kind of revenue. So that'd be my thoughts on that.
Yeah. I guess, Bill, but if one is gung ho about sports, that's not necessarily the best reason to go into college athletic administration. Now, you'd agree with that, though, right?
Correct. I think sometimes you kind of find yourself like my plan to be a coach my whole life, and became an athletic director at 28 years of age because the president just thought at St. Joe's thought I was the right person for the job. So I was forever blessed for that. But sometimes you sort of end up there and you don't always plan on it. Um, but for the most part, though, I think today you have a lot of people with not to deter you or Olivia from your careers, but there's a lot of lawyers there now.
Oh yeah.
I think the complexity of college sports these days, you probably just can't be kind of a fan. You really have to be knowledgeable in a lot of the legal things that come up because
Sure.
you look at Title IX, for example, the NIL situation. I saw where the University of Oregon is going through a bit of a lawsuit with their, I think it's the beach volleyball team, because the money that's going through the NIL is not going to the women's sports or women athletes. That's gonna be the first of many, I think. So I think that legal background is probably going to become more important in the years to come.
Bill, you mentioned Mark Emmert at the beginning of this of our interview, and he was the former University of Washington president who later became the NCAA director, national director. The new NCAA director is the former Massachusetts governor, Charlie Baker. Any thoughts on this transition to Baker, and any comparisons you can make between Emmert and Baker or contrast?
I've not met Charlie Baker. I know he's fairly new. Um, Obviously a talented guy to become a governor. I think the idea was to have somebody come in that could bring the two sides together. One thing I did notice over the years is that, when the graduation rates were getting really bad, remember those days about 2 or 3 decades ago? University presidents got much more involved in the operation of the NCAA. And we used to have like a Dick Schultz or Cedric Dempsey, people who were ADs before they worked their way up. Well, now we've had, I think, 3 or 4 presidents in a row. The guy from Indiana, of course, Mark Emmert. And so this is a change from that direction. This clearly was a change. And I just think it's gonna be a hard job. I think that's really one of the most difficult jobs you could probably have. You take almost any CEO of any corporation, and they do have formal authority, right? Whereas in the NCAA, you really don't. And I think it's going to take a unique person to come out of. So he is a change, from the last 3 or 4 presidents that they've hired in the NCAA. He's definitely is a change. And boy, I think we have about 3 or 4 really tough years. I think the whole NIL thing and the transfer portal. And I was watching TV a game last night, and this kid had been to 4 different schools. Then if you transfer portal and you enter it so many times, you're in 4 different schools in your career. How do you graduate? I mean, how do you graduate? You didn't transfer from school to school, but I was involved in watching student athletes transfer, and how do you graduate? Keep transferring to different schools, and ultimately that goes back to Kevin White's concept of the academy, where it is eternal education. You learn things that help you for the rest of your life. But if you play 4 years, the percentage of you getting the NBA or the NFL are slim, even if you play at the highest level. So what's the rest of your life? What do you do at 25 when your playing career is over? And
You don't love the transfer portal, do you, Bill?
Yeah, no. Well, some of it was interesting because I mentioned when Rick Pitino recruited my nephew, he signed in the fall, then he left to go to the Celtics in the spring. So I think there's some instances where I think you should be able to transfer if your coach leaves. I do, and I think there's other like special circumstances, but it's sort of it's wide open now, and the sad part is I think people recruit kids off of uh, the other team during the game almost. I mean, that's probably an exaggeration, but I was watching St. Mary's. I was a big fan of Randy Bennett there at St. Mary's, and who's turned down many jobs along the way. He just stays there. And I just looked at their roster last night, and all those guys on the team, none of them had transferred from somewhere else. It was just all 6 or 7 guys that played a lot. They were there. There's like a 6'10" guy that averaged 2 points a game as a freshman. Now he's a pretty good
Bill,
player.
I went to a couple of UW men's basketball games this year. I can't keep up with who all these guys are. It's just it's just all different era.
Well, I think they went through that one and done stage for a bit. A lot of folks did that, and Calipari at Kentucky, he was probably one of the first ones to really do that heavily. And then, I think some of us who are more traditionalists thought that was the wrong way to go. But as my friends in the business would say, that's the market. Like the NIL and the transfer portal, that's the market. So you may not like it. You may not agree with 100%, but if that's what it is to be successful, I mean, where would the football team be without the quarterback? Yeah, I watched him play. I was back in Indiana for a couple of years. I watched him play, and he kept getting hurt. He's a really good player at IU, but he was getting hurt about halfway through the season. So, but I think the transfer portal obviously was a big factor in going to the national championship game for the University of Washington.
Bill, back to Charlie Baker's situation for a moment. Is he in a bit of a no-win right now with these court cases that have come down and all this antitrust talk? I mean, congressional hearings are going on now over college sports. Is Baker a no-win in some ways?
Well, you hope that. I think sometimes you need a dynamic, charismatic leader during the worst of times. And I think we're sort of there. I think we're in the worst of times. And I hope that he's that person that is able to pull us out of this rut. It feels like we're kind of in a rut. And we just had a court case recently. I think it was the University of Tennessee, where there kind of are no rules for NIL right now. They're not enforceable. What kind of message does that send to you? And about a year ago, I think there was a big concern that it was a wild, wild west in the NIL business. And so they had a session, they come up with some rules and guidelines. Then the next one that they had to really make it more restrictive, they went the other way. They made it more loose. And so you're out there as an athletic director trying to do well with your coaches and by providing some NIL opportunities. And what rule are you breaking today that's not a rule tomorrow? And I think that's where you need a really strong, charismatic, and I don't want to be critical, but I don't think Charlie Baker, the new president, probably knows that many people in NACDA. He's learning. He's probably learning to meet all these folks. But you're in government. Maybe some of the skills you learn in government would help you in a situation like this. But I do think that it's going to take a phenomenal person. I hope he does well. I love the organization. I love NACDA. I love my career. I used to tell people I had 3 jobs my entire career. I loved every one of them, and I just hope we get back to what it used to be, where it's about the student athlete. It is about their educational experience, where you're developing young people for the better part of helping in society. And if we get away from that, we all know the European model and the models where they have the clubs and things, and that's not the United States. That's not the NCAA. We actually expect our young people to graduate and be wonderful citizens and contribute to their local citizenry. So, but I do worry a lot, and I think it's something we have to pay attention to.
Bill, what's going to happen to name and image likeness stuff at small colleges like University of Puget Sound or PLU? Great schools, but they don't necessarily have alums who are going to want to spend millions of dollars or even hundreds of thousands of dollars on name, image, likeness rights for athletes. What's going to happen to small colleges in particular with NIL stuff?
I think they'll just not get involved. You'll probably have some of those top programs at Division II I don't see Division III doing that, but I think some of the top programs in Division II in football and basketball, they'll probably get involved in that to a certain extent. And it's like when we had that Seattle, you had that really good kid that transferred to San Diego State and made the free throw to put him in the final four, the final two. Um, if we had that NIL, would he have stayed? Probably at the time. So I think there's going to become a bit of the haves and the have-nots, but where does it end? I mean, it sounds like Ohio State football spent a whole lot of money on NILs, and then the offensive coordinator now was the UCLA head coach. So um, I think we got some tough years coming up. I think the NIL needs to be defined. It needs to come under some kind of a structure, but it's like trying to get the horses back in the barn a little bit.
Yeah.
Once the horses are out of the barn, they go chase them down again. That's going to be difficult.
I don't know, Bill. I mean, take those two respective Pierce County universities I mentioned, UPS and PLU. Can you start having Tacoma car dealerships offering kids a grand or two here for stuff? I'm seriously, is
I
that
think and because I was a business professor, marketing
yeah,
professor for like it's a return on the investment. I
yeah.
meant to see some of these big donors who in the NIL, you just in SEC school or something like that, you give them $1 million. I think Nick Saban's got some good thoughts on this. Oh, by the way, he's a guy I would like to meet someday.
Nick Saban, yeah.
Yeah, I just found him to be probably the greatest football coach in the history of college football. And the thing he's been in Congress the last few days, and he says a lot of things that are problems that are coming up. And how do you restrict something? Oh, I will say this: I don't think a student athlete should ever be an employee. I don't think that should ever happen.
I was about to ask you about that.
Yeah, you see where that thing kind of comes up once in a while. I think if that gets to that, if we get to that point, then it's going to be bad. It's going to be horrible. What's stopping if you're an employee? What's stopping you from striking? We just had Dartmouth. What did Dartmouth do? They started a union with their men's basketball team.
I saw that.
And that's going to be interesting.
Bill, let me ask you those things. Maybe a hybrid approach. What if college athletes were not deemed employees, but they had workers' compensation rights, where if a kid sustained a long-term injury, he or she would be able to collect benefits under state workers' compensation laws. Could there be some kind of compromise like that?
We already have catastrophic injury insurance in the NCAA. See, a lot of those things. You're my real good friend Steve Looney, who passed away several years ago. But he was always pushing for paying players and all this because when he was back there in the '60s, if you get a guy from South Central LA, he or she, male or female athlete, they may not be able to, go on a date. I mean, John O'Brien was with him yesterday when he was in high school. He and his brother Ed, twin brother, they went on a single date because they didn't have any money. So those days were like that at the time. And in the NCAA, they had the Pell Grant that helped a lot. That was in addition to a full scholarship. Then they went the cost of living scholarship. That helped. There's a catastrophic insurance. But I should tell Steve at the time that we already do all that. Back in his day, it was bad. But we've gotten so much better. But as far as the workers' compensation thing, I think that kind of gets into the potential employee relationship. And, what's going to happen someday, Paul, there's a big football game on, maybe a bowl game, and the employees, the football team decide to strike. Those things are possible if you go down that road.
Bill, let me back up for a minute. You obviously know a heck of a lot more of this subject than I do. My understanding, tell me if I'm wrong, is that not all universities have long-term catastrophic health insurance for their college athletes.
I'm pretty sure the NCAA does.
Okay.
But I've been out for a while. You may have a better handle on that. But my impression was that in my 35-year career, towards the end of that, the last 5 or 6, 10 years, that there was a pretty good insurance program for student athletes if there was a catastrophic injury.
I had Jen Cohn on my show back in about 2018 before she left for USC. Maybe it was 2017. And Jen, I think, said the UW offers health insurance, I believe, up to 5 years after student athletes stop playing. That was back then. Maybe it's
Okay.
changed the last several years. But anyhow, I was just because that could probably change a lot of people's views on workers' compensation for student athletes if the NCAA did have lifetime long-term health insurance for the athletes. But anyhow,
I think that's probably worth really looking into more closely.
yeah, yeah,
And
gotcha.
maybe if you have me back in 5 years, I promise I'll find that out by then.
Okay, no, I don't have an answer to it.
Yeah. My
Bill,
third
there's some
interview.
talk about the Big Ten and SEC basically splitting off and having their own rules with NIL and paying athletes. What do you think having those two major conferences kind of creating their own uh, league essentially?
Well, what folks may not realize that the college football broke off a long time ago. So when you see all those bowl games, that's the College Football Association. It's not the NCAA. All the revenue for the NCAA comes through the basketball tournaments, the men's basketball in particular. That's where I think it's like $6 billion or something like that of revenue. So I think there's well, I can see a lot of issues that are coming up in the short term. Paul, I hope that this thing kind of you're going to have your bits of extremes, and I think at some point along the way, after 3 or 4 years of kind of going through this, somebody figures it out and we can all get consensus on it. Now, as Robert Gates, the guy back to that knack to the Hall of Fame thing, that he was a guest, the host, the speaker. And the one thing he had as a warning, he says, if we got problems in the NCAA, he was offered the job, by the way, I think.
The former Secretary of Defense was.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And he lives up here in Sammamish or something.
Right.
Another guy I'd like to talk to, by the way.
Oh, yeah. I met him once. Yeah. Yeah.
But you should have him as a guest on your show.
Yeah.
That Dershowitz, you should have this. You should Robert.
Okay.
But at that NACDA in 2022, he stands up and he goes, let me tell you something. He went through the NCAA book and he went 600 pages of rules and got it down to some reasonable number. It was pretty impressive. Him and he had a group do that. And when he says, if you think Congress is going to fix the problems of the NCAA, so you're just kidding yourself. There's no chance of that happening. And he wasn't kidding. He was very, very frank. So I go back that dynamic, transformational leader that can get us out of this mess.
Bill, a lot of the college tournaments are going on in Vegas now. Do you have a special connection, Bill, to Las Vegas and college tournaments?
Interesting you brought that up.
Okay.
Everybody remembers Marvin Webster, right?
Of course, the human eraser.
Sonics. Okay. What was his nickname in college?
Human eraser, right?
Human eraser. Where did he play?
Don't remember. He played for the Sonics, though.
Morgan State, Division II.
State. Okay.
So my team, St. Joe College, we're in the NCAA championship with them, with the round. So our guy was called the Human Rocket. He was from Puerto Rico.
Okay.
6'6", touch the top of the backboard. Unbelievable. Great. Played the Olympic Games for Puerto Rico. And so this whole thing was going in the press, the Human Eraser against the Human Rocket. Okay. It was played up in the press that way for the championship. And we got upset. We lost in an earlier round. So, but Marvin Webster was the guy. But my friend from Puerto Rico, back in the day, we had exempt events. Exempt event meant you could play additional games once every 4 years in Alaska, Hawaii, remote areas, or Puerto Rico. So my friend from Puerto Rico and 3 other guys, we started tournaments down in Puerto Rico. And we found that to be, we broke even. It was a hard sell at times, but I still, to this day, I love Puerto Rico. I'd go there tomorrow if I could find a way to get down there. But it started as trend. So after about 5 years of breaking even, one of our guys said, let's take it to Vegas. I thought, can you do that? And so we looked up all the NCAA rules and found that you could play in Vegas. You could have tournaments in Vegas. Well, we go there, and at the time, this is back in the 90s. At the time, the only place you could play tournament was at Thomas and Mack Arena, the UNLV. There was no other place to play, none. And so we were the first ones to go in there. We were going to actually build a court in one of the hotels because we figured that there'd be so much interest in going to Las Vegas from their fans, we could finally make some money at it instead of just breaking even. So we go there. We found one high school. It was Valley High School. They had a college-length floor, the only one, and it seated about 2,000 people. So for the first couple of years, we ran our tournaments out of that. And then Michael Gong built the arena there that the West Coast Conference plays in now, the Orleans. Then there's like 3 or 4 or 5 other big arenas, but it started with that first tournament. It was called the Las Vegas Invitational. But it was an exempt event. You didn't have to be remote anymore. You could have the events in the mainland, anywhere in the United States you could have it. So it hurt remember the Great Alaska Shootout. Those things they became less. Maui still does pretty well, but the ones in Puerto Rico, I think they continued to do those after we left. But here's what's interesting. So John McCain finds out about us moving a college basketball tournament to Las Vegas. He goes ballistic on USA Today. And guess whose name gets mentioned in the paper? You're looking. And I just got a new boss at the University of San Francisco. And I was with him for like 3 days. And this story comes out, and USA, I'm like, bad timing. But and guess who I didn't vote for in that election, right? So, but it turns out that, gambling is now, it's all online, and where you have the event doesn't really make that much difference, and how they got a pro football team. But it all started with that one basketball tournament way back in Valley High School gym. And to think that in 2 or 3 decades, you have the West Coast Conference, the Pac-12.
Amazing.
You have like 3 or 4 or 5 leagues that have their conference season tournaments there. But whereas years and years and years ago, you didn't think you could do it.
You were at St. Joseph's then.
Say what?
You were at St. Joseph's then when you
I was at USF.
You were at USF. Okay.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah, San Francisco then. So, but it goes back to, we started in Puerto Rico and moved into Vegas, and it was highly successful.
Bill, you can be a Trivial Pursuit question, and who was instrumental in getting the Vegas college basketball tournaments going. Yeah, that's amazing. Football too. God, that's really neat. You have your mark on that. What was the biggest challenges you had at each of your 3 respective positions at USF, CLU, and St. Joseph's?
Well, they're all Catholic schools, and 2 are Jesuits and Jesuit schools. I'd say probably it was always about the budgeting. Just finding a way to get enough money to run the operation at the level that was expected to be successful. All 3 had. I will say this: in Division II, like Puget Sound and Seattle Pacific, some of these other schools, you want to win.
Right.
In Division I, you have to win. It goes from a want to a need. You need to win. So, and I actually enjoy that. It's additional pressure, but I kind of like that. But you have to have scholarships. You have to have a budget to travel. What I always found interesting is that mostly when you start the fiscal year for any athletic department, you have fixed costs. They're not variable. I mean, you have a scholarship contract. You have a coach who makes X number of dollars. You have to play a certain number of matches. Those things are all fixed. And I used to find it interesting that sometimes you get someone say, well, let's just cut your budget back. Well, it's already spent. Well, this is only, September. Well, no, it's already, you don't have that option. So I think the budgeting issue was always a concern, and you always had to raise money. I think our first year at Seattle University, I think the income, we were Division II at the time, was about $60,000, if I remember right. The income from all sources, ticket sales and whatever else was going on. And by 2016, that was up to $3 million. $3 million, and that we needed every penny of that to try to balance it, but which we were fortunate to be able to do that. But I'd say the budgeting is probably the biggest thing. And it was obviously all Catholic schools, and there's an emphasis on other needs within the department. But I think that was the single biggest issue.
I had a sports economist on my show several years ago, Andrew Zimbalist. Zimbalist thinks the NCAA economic model is inherently unsustainable. He thinks most colleges are going to be losing money from college athletic programs. Do you buy that?
Yes.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I think he had a very few at the top that do well. And we're all depending on student fees pay for the like, for example, let's say you have a Seattle U West Coast Conference type school. Probably maybe outside of Gonzaga, probably the budget's in the mid-20s. I'd say 20 millions. And, if you're out earning three, there's a whole lot of other money that has to be in that budget to make sure you're operating. And yeah, Zimbalist, I've heard of him. I don't agree with all the things he says, but I think probably right about that one.
Okay, a family friend, retired lawyer Larry Bailey, wanted me to ask this question. Great guy, and his son played football at University of Washington. How would Bill Hogan save college sports? That's Larry's question.
Oh, wow. Um, I did worry when we put in all those graduation rate things. I mean, that became a real public problem for the NCAA and college athletics. I think we went to that. We emphasized just getting a degree no matter what it's in. You know what I'm saying? I mean, maybe folks in the SEC or other places, they started new majors that maybe didn't have a whole lot of meat to them. And I think I think get back to the basics. I think elevate people within the system, make sure that you have continuity and recognize that the whole power and the authority structure that's non-existent. I do think I obviously hope Charlie Baker does a great job, but I would like to see an NCAA NACTA person go back to that where we had Dick Schultz was one of the best NCAA people of all time. He was phenomenal. He's an athletic director. He's a former coach. He was fantastic. And Cedric Dempsey did a good job. But I think we need to get back to that. I do think there's areas of expertise where college presidents, university presidents have strong abilities in certain areas. But, sometimes I think let the experts, the athletic people that actually live that life and work their way up through the system, let them have an opportunity to fix it. I would say that get back to focusing on the student athlete and graduating, with a major that matters, that person can be employed for life in. I do worry a little bit about all the commercials you have. You go to the NCAA Final Four, and I went to about 20 in a row. Towards the end, it's like there's no flow to the game. There's a commercial every few minutes. There's a commercial, and I think that the money aspect of it is at some point you got to worry about the game. Like Caitlin Clark, I mean, she's done more for women's basketball. I record all her games, and if I can't watch it live, I'm recording her games. I mean, she's phenomenal.
Amazing.
Build up all those arenas. So I think just be careful not to make it too much only about the money. I've said this in my career for about 40 years. Is if the only reason why you're doing something is for the money, then that's not a good enough reason. Like the whole Pac-12, God, it breaks my heart to see that league just kind of fall apart.
Pac-2 now, crazy.
Yeah, and I think, if you're a UW or Southern Cal tennis player and you're playing matches at Rutgers, are you getting to your classes on time? I mean, those things. I think we got to get back to that basic. What is the purpose of a college athletic experience? It's get educated and get a degree, but traveling all over the United States to try to find a tennis match or soccer matches, I don't see that being a collaborative effort there.
Bill, my ADD-ish mind wanders a lot, and I just thought of another question. So you mentioned Vegas and your role in being part of the history of establishing major college tournaments out in Vegas. I was thinking of the controversial coach Jerry Tarkanian. Tark.
Yes.
Did Tark get a raw deal, and did Joe Paterno get a raw deal at the end? Two famous coaches. Did they each get raw deals in different ways?
Interesting, because so when I was in Puerto Rico, Jerry Tarkanian was the head coach at Fresno State, and I was assigned to be in his hotel and to help him meet him at the airport. You know how that goes when you're kind of like the ambassador. So
yeah,
about 1 o'clock in the morning, I have to go down to the front desk or something. So I go down the elevator, and I just got off on the first floor, and Jerry Tarkanian's standing right there. He goes, "Hey, Bill." I go, hey, coach, how you doing? He goes, fine. He says, I said, what are you doing? He says, I don't know. Want to sit down and have a chat? I go, the Hall of Famer, sure. So we talked for 2 hours from like 1 o'clock going until 3 o'clock. And they had a game that day. And his assistants kept coming trying to get him prepped for who they're playing against. But he was like a grandfatherly type guy. And did he ever break the rules? He probably had some secondary issues that were not real flattering. And I think you get in that mindset where people outside the program are getting involved. But from what I remember, and his son wrote a book about it. I think his name is Dannen. And they really didn't, he got accused of a lot of things. And people didn't like the fact that they were in Vegas and all that other stuff. And
Park the Shark, they call him.
Yeah. But I don't think he ever really, now he ended up going to Fresno and they eventually caught up with him at Vegas in some respects, but he had a pretty good run there at Fresno too. And Paterno is one of my favorite people. I in my class I talk about him all the time. I think it's hard to get a handle on exactly what happened. I watched the shows. It seems like it's kind of gone away. I'd love to see his statues back up there. When he said, "I wish I could have done more," I think that was taken. That's something that a caring, concerning person would say. I mean, what happened was horrible. There's no question about that.
Of course.
But how much was he complicit in that? That'll probably be reviewed. It's kind of. I think I'll wait to say it, but my basic thing is I like Tark and Paterno for different reasons. Tark took advantage of the rules as they were, whereas I thought Coach Paterno just lived that life. He's bigger than life. They're both kind of bigger than life figures, but I'd say let's wait about 5 years and wait till all the evidence comes out. Sort of like these other things we're doing politically these days. And
Gotcha.
Through.
Bill, I'm going to end on a couple of Seattle U questions. And why don't you comment a little bit on the basketball arena situation at Seattle U? Aren't they playing an arena right now? It's like smaller than some high school gyms.
Yeah, it's a nice. We remodeled it. It's very attractive space. It's got all the modern facilities. I think it's $8 or $9 million remodeling. But it's important, I think, for the university to eventually, if you want to kind of move up. The old days of the West Coast Conference, which is a good league for Seattle to be a member of, is you had to have at least 5,000 seats. So I think there's some. I haven't had that much discussion on that topic of late, but I think that's probably always a long-term goal, maybe a short-term goal, is to have something on campus. There's a spot, there's a good spot that can be used for that. But each year you wait, as you know, each year that you wait on that, the cost goes up quite a bit. I saw this yesterday. They got a $300 million art thing, which is a phenomenal donation, but it's all art. It'd be nice to have a $300 million donation to build a state-of-the-art facility there. So I think that's you're going to find a lot of Division I schools that do have smaller facilities. But I think if you have long-term aspirations to be in a league, the league that we're in now, the WAC, I mean, I was involved heavily, obviously, getting in the WAC, but we had Idaho and some other schools in there that were a little bit more regional. Now it's become a football conference, and it's Utah and Texas, and so that makes it more challenging.
Did you see CLU playing at Climate Pledge Arena again? I know they were at Key Arena for quite a few.
We played 3 or 4 years. So when I got here, we did the Key Arena, and that was great. I mean, when I got here, the Sonics were still. My goal was always have a play in an arena that has an NBA team. That was kind of my own personal thing, and I saw where it worked really well to other parts of the United States, including I tried to do it at USF. I was attempting to play the games. Dan Fanan owned the Golden State Warriors. Actually, he was a mentor for myself in particular, but also for Todd Lewicki. And he was Todd worked for the Warriors way back when. And so we had those connections, and it was fun. It was hard, but it was fun, and to try to figure out a way to make that happen. But ultimately, if you want to get back to like at USF and Seattle U, one thing that people remind you of pretty regularly is the glory days. The glory days. USF just won 20 games again for the 8th year in a row, and they're still not beating Gonzaga. They're still not getting in. They got one NCAA tournament, I think, 2 years ago. But those are reminders, constant reminders at places like that. In Seattle U, we had more people in the NBA at one time than any college in the country, any university in the country, way back in the late 60s.
That's amazing. That's amazing. A little Trivial Pursuit fact. Bill, you really feel a tie at all three of the institutions that you worked at and served as the athletic director at, right?
Okay, say that again.
You really feel a tie at all three of the institutions that you worked at.
Oh, yeah, I was. One of the rules I've had is I think some people take jobs looking for the next job. Whenever I took a job, I thought I'd be there for the rest of my life, and that's why I pursued it. I was very, I consider myself to be a very devoted person. I got caught up in it. Usually it took about 4 years, because after 4 years, those student athletes, those are your kids now, those are your young people, and you get attached to them, and you get attached to your coaches and staff. And yeah, I'm the worst person to interview to go to another job, because I talked myself out of several of them along the way. And sure. I was fine with that. I love my career, and no regrets.
Bill, you mentioned that large, excuse me, $3 million art donation that Mr. Richard Hedring made to CLU. I guess he's planning on donating an additional $25 million for a museum. It sounds like it's going to be a pretty amazing art museum. Could this give Seattle U more national visibility, this art museum that's likely going to be constructed? And could this end up helping to build up the athletic direct program more indirectly?
I thought about that when I saw that. And
yeah.
Seattle University is a tremendous school.
Right.
I had this thing where, how Notre Dame's kind of a national Catholic school.
Yeah.
There should be a Jesuit school that becomes the international Catholic school.
Sure.
Let's have rugby, and let's have all those sports that are more international basis. But the idea is to keep enhancing the image of the university. Cricket. I mean, I think cricket's starting up around. Leagues are starting up in the United States. So things like that, I think, make us feel like an international Catholic university. And being Jesuit is special. I mean, there's 28 universities, I think, that are Jesuit. You got Georgetown, you got Santa Clara, San Francisco, Xavier, Boston College, Loyola, Chicago. You got all those schools that are strictly Jesuit. So I think there's something unique about that. There's a nice little ring to that. So from that perspective, I think that that kind of a contribution, and I think they already have the Rhodey Lee Art Center. Rhodey Lee was a phenomenal Seattle U guy. He passed away, but he was a great guy. And but I think that enhances now. Does it directly relate to a sports thing? Now, if there's a way to put the museum in a new event center,
right.
That would be fascinating.
That's a great idea. That's an interesting idea. Yeah. Well, Bill, what a fun, and sometimes the interviews on this note. Anything that we didn't hit on today you want to share? Anything that we missed?
Let's all root for Seattle U today. I rooted for the Huskies yesterday. Unfortunately, they didn't make it past, but Seattle U plays at 6:00. There'll probably be a showing down to Chieftain that become. I was only there once, I think, about 4 years ago to Chieftain. So
I like the Chieftain.
Yeah, me too. So
there's a John Eddie O'Brien room there, which I
like. Yeah. So there'll be let's all root for Seattle U tonight, and hopefully they can get past the first round. And they played well enough the course here. I think they won 18 or 19, so they played well enough this year to be able to beat anybody in the league. And we just got to make some threes.
So if Seattle U wins their conference tournament, they're in the NCAA tournament, right?
Automatic bid. Yeah, you decide that before the year starts. You can either most schools now do an automatic bid on the conference champion.
Gotcha.
The conference tournament champion, not the conference regular season champion.
Right. Remember one year the Huskies won the regular season conference and did not get in. So that was
weird.
That was
horrible. That to me was that cannot really be explained very well.
I described that as like winning the popular vote, losing electoral college sort of situation.
Yeah.
Well, Bill, always great to see you. It's
You
been
too,
great
Paul.
to
Thanks for your time, and thanks for being so prepared.
listeners. I'll see
Yeah,
you soon, and thanks for your generosity with your time today. And